May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be whole. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ryan Conley, and I have the honor of being the service leader this morning. It's been a while since I've been up in the pulpit, so I hope I don't seem too disorganized. I must have changed the sermon 4 or 5 times. I started writing it before the election, and I was with hope and optimism. Radically changed it after that. Then I went with my family over the holiday and watched Wicked, which I hope that all of you have the pleasure of watching. It was fantastic. And it also shaped and changed my sermon this morning. Be fuller, like Margaret, our mother. Burn brighter, like Margaret, our sister. These were the words that were shared by women during the 19th century in New England, members of the Fuller Club. Margaret Fuller was a Transcendentalist woman, Unitarian leader, and inspiration. Her father was a congressional representative from Massachusetts, and he was extremely wise. And Margaret was the oldest child of many years, actually, 7 years before her next sibling was born. And her father recognized that she had a remarkable mind, and that even though it was the time of the earliest 19th century, that she should have the privilege of being educated like any boy would of that time. The educational attainment of women was vastly different than boys at that time. Women were brought in to learn how to sew, to keep a house, to cook, to clean, where boys are the only ones that were really granted the access to a formal education at that time. She was remarkable that she learned how to read by age 3, and she was reading in Latin by age 5. As she grew up, her gender made it so that she couldn't attend Harvard, yet she studied with various tutors from Harvard and completed an entire course of curriculum at Harvard, even though she never earned a formal degree. Like I said, she formed groups of women and encouraged them to do some radical things at that time. That it was okay to hold opinions that were different than your husband's. That women should be taught and formally educated. Women have the right to employment, even after they're married. And that some of the professions that women were guided towards, like teaching, were unnecessary, that a woman can accomplish anything that she wanted and had the right to do so. And these were really radical thinking at that time, very controversial. She was eventually given the title of editor of the Transcendentalist periodical called The Dial. And she served the Dial for many years as editor-in-chief, and probably the first woman to hold such a title. She was later given the opportunity to become a war correspondent for the New York Tribune, and she was sent overseas during the Italian unification period, where various kingdoms and factions within the Italian peninsula were vying for power for a unified Italy. She favored the Republic of Italy, but tragically that movement failed, and she had to escape with her husband and child that she met in Italy. But tragically, on the way home, just 100 yards from the port of New York, her ship ran aground, and she was tragically drowned with her husband and young child at that time. Like I said, Fuller was part of the Transcendental movement that swept New England in the mid-19th century. It was not only a religious movement within Unitarianism, but it also transformed philosophy and literature. This also, you have to put it in context of what was happening at the time. This was the early 19th century America. The leaders of the country at that time were generally the first generation of Americans. They were the first to be born in the United States of America at that time. The founding fathers were very old and dying. That generation was lost. And the people who fought during the Revolutionary War were also aging rapidly. So this was kind of the first truly American generation. There was a great rift within society about slavery and how people addressed that and addressed the situation was very interesting. There was lots of factions. We had the extreme religious belief like John Brown, radical in his time, very religious. And then what arose out of our movement was Transcendentalism, kind of a reaction to that, but in a different way. Transcendentalists were astonishingly anti-slavery. And this actually created a rift within our own denomination. There was a desperate desire by many of that time to keep the Union together. They were very anti-slavery at that time, yet they wanted to keep the Union together. So they were willing to compromise on things such as the Fugitive Slave Act, recognizing that the South needed slavery for economic reasons, at that time what they believed, and they wanted to preserve the Union. So much so that the president of the American Unitarian Association said that he would be willing to send his wife to slavery if she was an escaped slave, that he would be willing to send his child if necessary. But the great Transcendentalist preacher Theodore Parker pointed out that you notice that he wasn't willing to send himself to slavery. So it was an interesting time. The Transcendentalist ministers like Henry David Thoreau that we heard from today, and Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Theodore Parker, all were radical, and they were seen within the group as a problem. Many of them didn't even get fellowshipped. Theodore Parker had this massive church in Boston. He led thousands of people, spoke 3 hours, and I hope I don't speak 3 hours today. Spoke 3 hours at a time about his transcendentalist views and beliefs, yet he never was allowed to be part of the Unitarian Association because of his radical anti-slavery, anti-abolitionist, his radical beliefs about those concepts. So that it was an interesting time. So some of the beliefs about transcendentalism, because it's kind of hard to wrap your head around it. One of the beliefs is that everyone is connected through something called an oversoul, that we share kind of a single soul, and that each person is just a branch of that. I imagine like an aspen tree, or aspen forest, if you imagine. They all share the same root system. They all basically the same organism, yet there are individual trees. And those individual trees, those individual people experience the world through their own experiences. They experience the divine in their own unique way. And that it's important that we respect that person's individual experiences. Human beings are natural beings. and are best when they are close to nature. Our focus in our denomination to nature and our respect for the interdependent web of existence has its roots in this movement. There was the belief of self-reliance, that it's important that you are less dependent on others and more reliant on caring for yourself. Henry David Thoreau's book, Walden, Life in the Woods, was probably an extreme example of that, where he basically moved out into the woods on a lake, Walden, and lived there for 2 years alone. Probably not as radical as we need to be when it comes to self-reliance. I interpret it more as it's an important thing that you recognize within yourself who you are and accept that. There's this belief in transcendentalism that human institutions and organizations are inherently corrupted, that they try to force you into believing and accepting an identity or something else other than who you truly are. And so we have to be mindful of that and learn how to adapt those understandings. There's this concept called transcendentals, and that's really where the transcendentalism movement comes from. It's this idea of a higher plane of thinking. Maybe today we would call it critical thinking. We have in ourselves a logical mind and an emotional mind. And we need that transcendental mindset to bridge the two and understand a higher, deeper understanding of our communities, of our lives. So that's transcendental thinking. When you're thinking higher. You're looking at the rational thing, you're feeling the emotions, but you're bridging the two together and coming up with something better. I used to have these naive beliefs that I could convince anyone with some simple facts, some evidence. I present the evidence, I make the case, I show them. I took one of those personality tests, Myers-Briggs, and I learned that I have an ENTP personality. And they call it the debater. I like to study philosophy and learn all the various fallacies. And I like to point them out. Like, oh, you're committing a straw man argument. You're promoting a false cause. You're asking a loaded question. You're making an argument from ignorance. What is an argument from ignorance? It's an argument where you kind of assume a presumption is true, and you wait for that to be disproved rather than proven. Where the proper default position would be to say, I don't know. And that's difficult for people to say. It's amazing. I don't know is something that's really hard for people to accept. And learning how to understand that that person might see things through a different perspective. There's something called the reiteration effect. The more you hear something, the more likely you believe it's true, and it's harder for you to be convinced otherwise. Like if you start a new job, you're much more willing to listen to other people around you. You're much more willing to hear different ideas. You're not set in your ways, as it were. And you are more adaptable to those conditions. But compare that after working somewhere for 30 years and trying to convince a group of 30-year employees to try something new. It just doesn't work. The new people will adopt it, but the older people, the people who have been established there and have this whole concept of brain of how that is to be will resist that change. Transcendentalism says you have to think above that and come with a transcendental mindset and accept that things can be changed and that you might be a subject of human-caused corruption. and that your understandings through your life may have been affected by the institution that you're a part of. I have been watching the X-Files lately, and I find it, in one episode, Fox Mulder, who is the FBI agent, noticed that the drain was going the wrong way, and he knew that something was off because of that. But I remember that, no, the Coriolis effect is a real effect, but requires a massive area in order to feel the difference of the Earth's rotation between the north and the south part of the water. So a small little basin is really not going to have that much effect. So it's more likely the shape of the basin, how the water pours into it before it makes that change. So it's that understanding that things are a fix, but looking at something that's different doesn't necessarily mean it's really that big of a deal. When someone feels attacked, their identity feels attacked. To them, it's the same as a physical attack. That fight, flight, or freeze reflex in our mind acts upon even when you just simply are attacking their belief. Their beliefs, they believe, form their identity. And you're attracting and you're attacking those beliefs. You're attacking their very existence, their very identity. People like to form tribes. People like to form tribalistic thinking, and if they are attacked or feel threatened, they like to sit within their tribe or go back for that protection. That is just simply a matter of evolutionary fact. That's how we survived as a species. We gather together to protect ourselves from outsiders. We gather together to protect ourselves from new ideas and new ways of thinking. So it was necessary for the human beings to form these tribal relationships. But they have a dark side. They protect us from new ways of thinking, new ways of understanding, new beliefs. They're easily corruptible as well. Those tribes, those beliefs, and those protections. So we have to recognize that human institutions, human understandings, even ourselves can be corrupted. When I look at today, and I just watched that wonderful movie, Wicked, we see an opportunistic showman finds himself in charge and remains in charge by relying on those showmanship skills. Magic, false magic, just tricks, duping the people around him into following him and becoming the leader. Those groups find a population to scapegoat. In Wicked, they find the animals, the sentient animals, and attack them. And the people around them are just kind of clueless and unaware. This is a story that's been told over and over and over again. Look at Star Wars. Same type of situation. An opportunistic person comes up, takes advantage of people, corrupts them, remains in power through tricks, through manipulation. We don't seem to be flirting with authoritarianism at this time, but rather we are now fully embedded within it. We see children's hospitals threatened by government officials to lose vital funding over the opinions expressed by doctors on their TikToks. Our own organization can be at risk. Congress recently debated a law which would allow the executive to give him the authority to unilaterally, with no court hearing, no evidence, nothing, and have their tax-exempt status removed simply because he deemed it as a terrorist organization. We see our platforms of retribution prevailing over platforms of hope and reconciliation. All of these are meant to silence the opposition. Yet we have to recognize that the individual person those people that we seem to be opposed to us, those individuals, see the world through different eyes. We see the world through Elphabet's eyes, the Wicked Witch of the West. We see the corruption. We see what is going on behind the scenes. At least we like to think we do. But they see the world through Dorothy's eyes. Innocent, naive, comes into a situation, been told things, false things about who is threatening who. And the feelings of that. And that's exactly, I think, how we are seeing ourselves in this situation. Now, I have to recognize that my identity gives me a certain amount of protection. I'm a white, cisgender man, upper middle class. My identity does give me a lot of protection for what's to come. And that there are people, even in this congregation, that are in real danger of oppression. And we have to recognize that we are here to give them the comfort. But we don't want to descend into our own tribalistic thinking to protect ourselves from what they're going to say. We don't want to push people away from us necessarily, but we have to learn how to reach them. I'm still very much learning these situations. I look back and realize that I ignored a lot of things when it comes to my own relationship. I manipulated him. I portrayed myself as the wiser, and I didn't listen to him. I didn't respect his upbringing and his religious beliefs, often mocking them as childish and superstitious. I took times where he was just looking to be close to me as just being silly and ridiculous. I forgot that my strong debater personality gives me a strong desire to win an argument rather than looking at the needs and his perspective. And that winning the argument isn't always what I needed to do. I forgot to listen rather than sharing my constant opinion. I felt a need to guide when I should have let him to see the world himself and gain a better understanding how we see things. Always being right isn't always the right thing to do. And these were ignoring those transcendental principles, not allowing him to gain self-reliance, not realizing that he experiences the world through his own perspective, and sometimes just being quiet and listening and appreciating our time is what truly matters. I may have messed up. I may have ruined things. I hope I haven't. At least I hope that I can grow from what I have learned in my experiences. And I will use them to improve myself and handle myself in the future relationships. And frankly, that's one of the biggest reasons why I came to this religious community. Because I needed to understand what those values are. Keep in mind this. Like myself, I have had bad ideas, and all of us have had bad ideas in our times of our lives. Yet we have been saved from them. We have learned and we are worthy. If there is hope for you and I believe that on all I being there is hope for us, then there is also hope for those around us that have terrible beliefs. I get it that consideration feels like concession, especially if we are looking at how those beliefs can affect others and cause massive harm to others. But our transcendentalist teachers give us the tools to look beyond the facts and move past our emotion and see that transcendent mystery in everyone. It might mean that we have to listen more than we speak, learn their perspectives and how they came to their beliefs. It might mean that we have to learn to speak their language and be able to speak to our values using their language. If we don't, aren't we just resorting to our own tribalistic thinking, treating this us versus them mentality? I've already learned much from you. I love to hear Sherry speak of her ministry at work. And I love the fact that she calls it a ministry, where she tries to reach each individual where they're at, not knowing any of the history, not knowing any of their beliefs, just trying to be there for that person at that moment. That is a transcendentalist thinking. And I remember Tara teaching us that we need to not go after the attacker, but comfort those that are being attacked. And I think that's really what we are here to do. Let us continue our work to provide a place of hope where we can learn and love and be the guides on this world. Each of us have a small seed within us that is unique and special in the world. Let us cultivate it with love, and let us always see the beautiful potential in it. Amen.
Amen.